Hi, I'm here with Lisa Blackwood-Kapral, who's the Chief Accounting Officer of Lyft. Lisa, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Tell us a bit about your role as the Chief Accounting Officer at Lyft. What does that mean, and what is your kind of functional responsibilities?
Absolutely. So as the Chief Accounting Officer, I wear many hats. I've been at Lyft for about a year and a half now. I started there just post the IPO, so came in really to really understand what needed to happen as a publicly held company, being that they had just gone public. You know, a lot of finance transformation, really had to look at bringing in a lot of people and reimagining the footprint of finance. So it's been a long journey, a lot of change. But, you know, my background pre-Lyft, I was really in the tech space and in retail, having been at companies such as Best Buy, Gymboree, Stella & Dot. I've done a lot of ERP implementations, so, you know, have a lot of background in the finance transformation space.
Now, you joined one quarter right after the IPO, very busy time, and
Yes.
your goal was to increase transparency for investors and to up the regulatory and compliance functions. How were you able to achieve that during such a fast-moving, important time in the company's history?
Yeah, great question. You know, Lyft, the DNA at Lyft is, you know, fast, a lot of change. You know, it's really the culture at Lyft. It's super speedy. And so, you know, coming into the role, I played a role of really working with finance teams, working cross-partnership with our CIO office to, you know, assess the needs of what needed to happen. You know, there was a lot of decentralized systems, a lot of manual processes. To get the books closed took several days, more like weeks. And so really needed to shorten that close to get that data into the hands of our stakeholders faster was kind of my key objective.
And why is that so important? I mean, you said that you want to be able to, after the quarter ends, to be able to close the books as quickly as possible, get the 10Q filed, you know, almost immediately. Why is that speed so essential to the close?
I think it's super important as a growth company in a public company space to be able to have data and flexibility. You know, to get that data to our stakeholders as fast as possible so that they can make nearly real-time decisions. In the space of growth, you know, with that flexibility to be able to pivot at any time to move into markets that Lyft is looking into going into is super important. You know, without that flexibility, without that data, real time, you're looking in the rearview mirror instead of looking ahead to make those decisions to grow with the market and be able to be flexible to do so.
And you're moving towards doing a fully autonomous close. Where are you in that journey, and what will that enable you to do once you achieve it?
Well, so right now we are in the middle of the implementation of a full ERP suite. Back in January, we implemented the Oracle FHA subledger, and that significantly shortened our close for just the revenue piece of it. You know, by several days, actually. Once we go live with the full ERP of Oracle suite of products, that is January 1st, 2021, I expect to shorten the close by several days. Again, we have very decentralized processes, decentralized systems, I should say, manual processes. It's taking us you know, over 12 days to close the books. My expectation is once we have Oracle ERP implemented, we'll shave that in half. And then once we continue on the journey of other suite of products of Oracle, we'll further shave that down by three more days is the ultimate goal.
You began this transition in January. Then obviously COVID hit. At the same time, you were gearing up for your first SOX certification. I think you know where I'm going with this. What role did COVID play in that? How were you able to still navigate these big changes and make this move during that period?
Well, I'm not going to sugarcoat. It's been a very challenging year, to say the least. You put it quite well, of the list of stacked priorities that Lyft signed up for in 2020. And at the beginning of 2020, we had no idea that we were going into a pandemic, on top of, as you put it well, a full ERP implementation, our year one of SOX compliance, which, there's no, you have to do that, obviously, as a public company. But the way I looked at it when we were late in 2019, thinking about these decisions, was I really had no other route to take. We couldn't be publicly held and have room for error with, like I said, the highly decentralized systems and manual processes. We had to be SOX compliant. And I didn't want to put in wait till we're SOX compliant and then do the ERP implementation, because we'd have to do everything twice, right? You'd have to change all those controls again because the systems changed. And so it made no sense. And that room for error was a showstopper for me. So 2020, then along comes the pandemic on top of it. And, the good news is, or the silver lining, if you will, is that Lyft has, again, this environment, this culture of super fast, super dynamic, really quick decisioning type of culture, which helped us be able to do this implementation during a pandemic, during SOX compliance year one, quite well, actually, and the fastest I've ever done an implementation for an ERP system.
And you did it in 4 months. You implemented the Oracle Accounting Hub. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you characterize that as Lyft speed. Tell us a bit about how you were able to do it in 4 months and what Lyft speed means culturally.
Well, one of my coworkers uses this term all the time. He calls it lightning in a bottle. And I think what it means is we make decisions very fast. The bureaucracy of a lengthy decision-making process just doesn't exist at Lyft. There's real collaboration across teams. I think the relationship between the finance organization and the office of the CIO is one of the best I've ever seen. The pace we go at and the expectation to, pace with the growth of the company just set us up really well to be able to do these implementations incredibly fast.
You've talked a lot about how having a single source of information, a single source of truth in all of your accounting work and all your accounting systems is essential. Is that partly due to the speed? Is it the movement into new markets and new products? What is the nexus of the reason why you need that single source of information? I've
seen in past lives, if you will, decentralized systems. And what happens with these decentralized systems is that you have to reconcile between all of them to make sure they're all telling the same story. You also have folks that will use different systems to come up with a different answer. So when stakeholders have different answers for the same question, because you don't have one source of truth and one ecosystem, it slows down your decision-making process. It lengthens your close cycle. It, puts a hurdle in front of decision makers to get that nearly real-time data. So for me, having one ecosystem, one source of truth, one place where people get all their reports, the same answer to the test, if you will, then you can, then you can be quick decisioning and do the lightning in the bottle that I alluded to.
Following on that, what makes Lyft unique from other businesses, or maybe unique from many businesses, is that you guys do billions of transactions a year. Mm-hmm. What additional stress and responsibilities does that put on the systems in your work?
A lot. It's quite a voluminous amount of data that pumps through the pipes of the engine. But the Oracle Revenue Hub, handles it quite well. And as I said, we shorten we shorten the time period to get the revenue, which is, the meat of your business needs and decision-making data within, 4 days, which had been, up to 10 days when I first arrived. And so that has been super, super, amazing. Not only at the end of the month, right? But as you're journeying every single day to get that flash of revenue. How is the business doing? That pulse is key to making quick decisions.
I want to go to some bigger picture strategic questions now. What role do you believe that finance and accounting plays in Lyft's mission to innovate and reimagine transportation?
I think a very key role. I think it's very important in any organization to have your finance business partners at this very much a seat at the table of decision making and strategic planning. Finance is, the keeper of the data, if you will, right? And if they understand the business really well, and if they're at the table understanding the direction of the business, they can bring the right data. They can go, analyze the information to come up with ideas even for strategic growth for the company, not just responding to the questions of leadership, but actually understanding the direction, being able to provide the data, the correct data, and analyzing it in tandem with leadership so that we are making the right decisions and not, responding incorrectly to the market.
And kind of following on that, what about the role of resiliency? When you look at the pandemic and you look at the shock that it hit to every single business, what is the role of finance and accounting in building resiliency into a business like Lyft?
Yeah, we've, as you can imagine, Lyft is, not thriving during COVID, and so we've had a lot of challenge in the impact that it's had to cope with COVID. And so we went into a real cost conscious mode. And in order to be able to do that, we needed very granular level of information and data quickly and, like I said, nearly real time in order to be able to really go in deep to our spend and our OpEx and really understand where there was any fat that we can trim. And that's been amazingly helpful as we've journeyed through this pandemic to be able to cut those costs necessarily in order to offset the negative impact that we've had on revenue.
And now the flip side, the hopeful flip side of that is, as we emerge from the pandemic sometime in 21, what switches or reorientations will you need to do to the finance organization to lean back into growth, to lean back into kind of movement forward as opposed to resiliency?
One of the things that we've looked at is, in Silicon Valley, as you can imagine, engineering resources are, being, sought out by all the big players in the Bay Area. And, we are looking at how can we put engineers in other markets in order to be able to pivot and have that flexibility to, still have that plethora of engineering resource, but not try and all get it from the same pool. And as a result, going into other markets, we needed a product, a tool that could scale with that type of change. For instance, we're putting a bunch of engineers in Belarus. And so we needed a tool that could have multi-currency, handle a global footprint, and be able to do that as well and quickly and consolidate our books timely in order to pivot with those type of asks that honestly are kind of the name of the game at Lyft. There's regular cadence of, how can we grow the business? How can we change, to meet the needs of the market?